Welcome to the National Museum of Racing and Hall of Fame. The museum was founded in 1950 by a group of thoroughbred enthusiasts who thought the sport needed a national museum to showcase the history of racing in America. The Hall of Fame was established in 1955 to honor the sport's most accomplished participants. Horse racing in America began as soon as the colonies had enough interest in the sport. It was a rapidly growing pastime in 17th century England. America did not lag far behind, and by the 1660s, racing was a regular event from New York to Virginia. The first racecourse was established in 1665 in what is now Hempstead Plains on Long Island in New York. The horses competing at these early meets were not the thoroughbreds we know today. By the early 1700s, horses raced in heats, usually 3 or 4 miles each, demanding not only speed but also remarkable stamina and endurance. The thoroughbred, which possessed these qualities, was developed in England during the 17th century by breeding Arab stallions to native English mares. The South dominated thoroughbred racing in the United States prior to the Civil War. The sport was very closely associated with the lives of wealthy Southern gentlemen. One of the reasons why the South was so successful in thoroughbred breeding and racing was because slaves were a readily available labor force. It takes a significant amount of manpower to operate just a single racing stable. Slaves performed a myriad of jobs in a 19th century horse barn. The majority were stable boys and grooms who were responsible for taking care of the daily needs of the horses and ensuring that they were clean, comfortable, and healthy. This type of work was not one of unskilled labor and actually required extensive training from an older, knowledgeable groom. Even though these were specialized jobs, the enslaved black horsemen were not seen as complete human beings, and instead viewed as highly specialized and valuable tools in the horse industry. The history of the enslaved black horsemen pre-emancipation is a difficult history to unpack, as most of the written historical records from this time were written by white men. Still, it is important to note that these men and the skills they had were essential to the thoroughbred racing industry. From breeding to foaling to racing to retirement, these horses were in the care of enslaved black horsemen, and without them, the 18th and 19th century racing world would not have been possible. At this time, jockeys were considered more for their small size rather than great skill on a horse. It wasn't until after emancipation that the importance of a jockey's role in a race was truly recognized. Saratoga Racecourse opened in 1864. Half of the jockeys that raced in Saratoga at this time were African American. One of the most notable of these jockeys was a man named Abe Hawkins, a former slave who rode both in slavery and as a freedman after 1964. He won the Travers Stakes in 1866 and the first Jerome Stakes, originally held at Jerome Park in Westchester County, New York, that same year. In the inaugural running of the Kentucky Derby in 1875, 13 of the 15 jockeys were black, and it was won by a black jockey named Oliver Lewis. In total, 15 of the first 28 Kentucky Derbies were won by black men. Jimmy Wingfield was the last black jockey to win the Kentucky Derby, both in 1901 and 1902. Even before Wingfield's historic wins, life on the racetrack began to increasingly reflect society's negative views of black men, particularly successful black men, which many of these jockeys were. Black jockeys were discriminated against as racism in America continued to grow. Anti-black jockey unions were established by white riders, and white jockeys would often attempt to injure black jockeys and their mounts by pushing them against the rails or creating a wall of horses to block any chance of them winning a race. Black men were pushed out of skilled occupations all across America, and now that could be seen in the thoroughbred racing world as well. White jockeys wanted the lucrative job of a jockey, and they were successful in removing black men from their positions as racism swept through the entire country. Horse owners, who were themselves predominantly white men, accepted this change and stopped hiring black jockeys to ride their horses in races. For the most part, black men were able to stay in the industry. They were just once again subjugated to the roles of groom and stable hand. Many famous horses through the 19th and 20th century were taken care of by black horsemen who maintained their skill and expertise with horses. Recently, there has been an increased African American presence in the sport of thoroughbred racing, most notably a black jockey from Louisiana named Kendrick Carmouche, who won his first Grade 1 stakes race in December of 2020. In the year 2000, the Kentucky Derby saw its first black jockey since 1921. In 2013, Kevin Krieger became the second since 1921. Just this past year, Greg Harbert became the first African American owner to enter a horse in the Kentucky Derby in 13 years. The Harbert family is well steeped in the industry. His great-grandfather, Will Harbert, is well known as Man o' War's groom in retirement, one of the greatest racehorses of all time. There have been 7 African American jockeys and trainers inducted into the National Museum of Racing's Hall of Fame since the first class in 1955. Isaac Murphy, a remarkable jockey, was part of this first induction class.
Many historians of thoroughbred racing consider Isaac Murphy to be the greatest jockey of all time. Born in 1861 in Kentucky, Murphy was the son of a former slave who fought for the Union Army during the Civil War. Murphy grew up around the horse barns at nearby Lexington stables and became an exercise rider in his youth. At the age of 14, weighing a reported 95 pounds, Murphy was given his first professional mounts as a jockey at Churchill Downs. Within a few years, he became one of the biggest stars in all of the sport. Murphy rode his first Kentucky Derby winner in 1884 aboard a horse named Buchanan. He went on to take back-to-back editions of the race in 1890 with Riley and in 1891 with Kingman. In 1891, when jockeys were seldom mentioned in news reports, the Louisville Courier-Journal devoted an entire column to Murphy after his third Derby victory. Kingman was owned and trained by Dudley Allen and had the distinction of being the only horse owned by an African American to win the Kentucky Derby. Murphy's 3 Derby victories were not equal until Earl Sandy achieved the feat 39 years later in 1930. The record was not bested until Eddie Arcaro, regarded by many as the top jockey of the 20th century, rode into the picture almost 60 years after Murphy. Along with the Kentucky Derby, Murphy won 4 editions of the American Derby, which was considered at the time the biggest race in the country. He also won 5 runnings of the Latonia Derby and 4 editions of the Clark Stakes. At the age of 18, Murphy became a star at Saratoga Racecourse. He won the 1879 Travers Stakes aboard Falsetto. That victory catapulted him into the national spotlight for the first time because he defeated Belmont Stakes winner Spendthrift and the famed white jockey Edward Feeks. After his Travers victory, the Spirit of the Times praised Murphy's excellence, stating that he is, quote, one of the best jockeys in America. He is very observant during the progress of a race, keeps a sharp lookout for danger, is quick to perceive the weak points of an adversary, and prompt to take advantage of them. He has a steady hand, a quick eye, a cool head, and a bold heart. Murphy later became a trainer and owned several horses following his retirement as a jockey. He died of pneumonia in 1896 at the age of 35. Overall, Murphy won a record 44% of his career races. The National Turf Raiders Association established the Isaac Murphy Award in 1995, annually presented to the jockey with the highest win percentage. Murphy was inducted into the National Museum of Racing's Hall of Fame in 1955 as part of the institution's inaugural class. Born in Childsburg, Kentucky in 1882, Jimmy Winkfield became only the second jockey to win consecutive editions of the Kentucky Derby, achieving the feat with His Eminence in 1901 and Allenadale in 1902. In 1901, Winkfield won 220 races overall, including prestigious events such as the Clark Handicap, Latonia Derby, and Tennessee Derby. In 1904, Winkfield was one of several prominent American jockeys who went abroad to race. During the next dozen years, he became the champion jockey in Russia 3 times. In that country, he won the Russian Derby 4 times and the Russian Oaks 5 times. During this era, he also rode successfully in Poland, winning the Warsaw Derby twice. During the Russian Revolution of 1917, Winkfield helped the racetrack community and 200 horses escape from the war through Odessa on a 1,000-mile journey. Winkfield later rode in France, where he won several top races in that country, including the Grand Prix Deauville. When he retired from racing at the age of 50, records indicated Wingfield had won more than 2,500 races in various countries in a career of more than 30 years. He became a successful trainer in France until war again forced him to flee. Wingfield briefly trained in the United States before returning to France after World War II, where he died in 1974. The United States House of Representatives passed a resolution to honor Wingfield in 2005, and the New York Racing Association named a race in his honor that runs each year at Aqueduct. Wingfield was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2004. Born in Beaver Dam, Kentucky in 1871, Shelby Pike Barnes became a star jockey as a teenager. In 1888, he led all North American riders with 206 wins, becoming the first jockey to top 200 in a single year. His 1888 campaign is even more remarkable considering his closest pursuer, George Covington, rode just 95 winners. Barnes also had the highest win percentage that year, 32.9. Barnes secured his status as an elite rider with a star-making performance in the inaugural Futurity Stakes in 1888. Staged by the Coney Island Jockey Club at Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn, the Futurity was the richest sporting event to date in America, paying an unheard of $40,900 to the winning connections. Aboard the favorite Proctor Knott, Barnes battled Hall of Famer Salvatore and Hall of Fame jockey Anthony Hamilton in the 6-furlong sprint. Barnes and Proctor Knott dug in deep during the stretch and secured a half-length victory in one of the most notable races of the 19th century. Barnes was again North America's leading jockey in 1889 with 170 wins. That year he won the Travers Stakes aboard Long Dance and the Champagne Stakes with June Day. In 1890, Barnes piloted Burlington to victories in the Belmont Stakes and the Brooklyn Derby. That summer he also won the Alabama Stakes at Saratoga. Barnes rode for several of the top owners of his era, including James Ben Ali Hagan, Marcus Daly, and Lucky Baldwin. Barnes passed away at the age of 37 in 1908. In a letter to the National Museum of Racing, historian Fred Burlew ranked Barnes as one of the top 5 African-American jockeys in the history of the sport. Barnes was inducted in the Hall of Fame in 2011. Born in 1886 in South Carolina, Anthony Hamilton was only 15 years old when he began his career as a professional jockey. Hamilton's first notable victory was in 1881 when he won the Phoenix Handicap. Throughout the next 15 years, Hamilton won many of the most prestigious races in America, including all 3 of the major New York handicaps, the Brooklyn twice, as well as the Suburban and the Manhattan. Hamilton is the only African-American rider to win all 3 of New York's major handicaps. In 1890, Hamilton won the 3rd edition of the Futurity Stakes with the champion Potomac. The race was the richest event in American history at the time, with a purse of more than $67,000. Hamilton enjoyed a remarkable year in 1890, leading all riders with a 31.2 win percentage. The following year, Hamilton increased that percentage to a staggering 33.8. He won 154 races that year, ranking 2nd in the national standings. Hamilton's success in the major American races of his era was phenomenal. His prominent victories included the 1887 American Derby, back-to-back editions of the Monmouth Oaks, as well as the inaugural Gazelle Handicap in 1887. He won the Monmouth Handicap twice and also 5 runnings of the Twin City Handicap. Many of the top owners in the sport sought out the services of Hamilton. He rode in the colors of Pierre Lorillard, Billy Lakeland, Mike Dwyer, J.R. Keane, and the Belmont family. His most famous mounts included the Hall of Famers Ferenzi and Salvatore. Following his career in America, Hamilton rode in Europe with considerable success. He won the Metropolitan Stakes in Austria, the Caroli Memorial in Hungary, and the Ruler Stakes, which is the first leg of the Polish Triple Crown. After his career, Hamilton moved to France, where he died in 1907. Racing historian Fred Burlew ranked Hamilton 3rd on his all-time list of the greatest African-American jockeys of all time, behind only Isaac Murphy and Willie Sims. Born in Augusta, Georgia in 1870, Willie Sims was the leading jockey in North America in both 1893 and 1894. During his remarkable career, Sims won the Kentucky Derby and the Belmont Stakes twice each and became the only African-American rider to win the Preakness. Sims began riding at the East Coast tracks in 1887. He rode for many of the prominent owners of the era, including August Belmont, James R. Keane, the Dwyer brothers, and Pierre Lorillard. Sims won 182 races in 1893 and increased that total to 228 the following year, winning at 33%. He won consecutive editions of the Belmont during those years with Comanche and Hall of Fame member Henry of Navarre. Sims won the Derby in 1896 on Hall of Famer Ben Brush and again in 1898 with Plaudette. Also in 1898, he won his Preakness with Sly Fox. Sims won many of the most prestigious races of his era, including the Suburban Handicap, Champagne Stakes, Jerome Handicap, Brooklyn Derby, and Spinaway Stakes. Based on available records, Sims won 1,173 races in his career, a remarkable 24.9 win percentage. He also rode briefly in England, where he is credited with introducing the American style of riding with short stirrups, which was later popularized by Hall of Famers Todd Sloan and Danny Mahar. Sims was inducted into the National Museum of Racing's Hall of Fame in 1977. Ansel Williamson's career as a racehorse trainer spanned the pre-Civil War era of the 3-mile heat races all the way to the dawning of the single or dash race era. Born a slave in Virginia, the point from which his record can be traced with confidence begins in the South around 1860. For his owner, T.G. Goldsby, Williamson trained the horse Brown Dick for important victories at New Orleans, Charleston, Atlanta, and Mobile. Williamson was sold to A. Keene Richards and trained the noted runners Australian and Glycerna. He was then sent in 1864 to work for R.A. Alexander of the famed Woodburn Stud in Kentucky. Williamson was then freed, but he remained in Alexander's employ and trained a succession of major horses, including the undefeated pair of Norfolk and Asteroid. Norfolk won the inaugural Jersey Derby of 1864. Known as Old Ansel, Williamson later worked for H.P. McGrath and trained Hall of Fame member Tom Bowling, winner in 14 of his 17 races, including the Travers Stakes, Jersey Derby, and Dixie. In 1875, Williamson trained Aristides, winner of the inaugural Kentucky Derby that year. That year, Williamson also won the Belmont Stakes with Calvin. Both horses were owned by McGrath. Other noted horses trained by Ansel Williamson included Merrill, winner of the 1866 Travers Stakes, Virgil, the dam of Hall of Fame member Hindu, as well as Aaron Pennington, Chesapeake, and Susan Ann. Other major races won by Williamson include the Jerome, the Phoenix, and the Withers. Williamson was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1998. Born into slavery in Kentucky, Edward Brown was an accomplished jockey before becoming one of the top trainers of the 19th century. Following the abolition of slavery, Brown was a rider for Woodburn Farm, riding Asteroid, winner of all 9 of his starts in 1864 and 1865. In 1870, Brown had the biggest highlight of his career as a jockey, winning the 4th edition of the Belmont Stakes at Jerome Park aboard the horse Kingfisher. A few years later, Brown became a trainer. In 1875, he saddled King Alfonso to beat the great Hall of Fame horse Tenbrook in the Kentucky St. Leger. 2 years later, in 1877, he earned the biggest victory of his career as a trainer when Baden won the Kentucky Derby. Brown trained for some of the top owners of the era, including Colonel Milton Young and Colonel W.S. Barnes throughout the 1880s. He won numerous stakes with horses such as Bootjack, Barnum, and Troubadour. In 1881, Brown won 53 documented races, one of the top totals in the country, including 15 that August at Saratoga. Brown later owned and developed future Hall of Famer Ben Brush and Plaudit, both of whom won the Kentucky Derby after Brown sold them. Ben Brush was regarded as the top 2-year-old of 1895 when he won 13 of 16 races for Brown. Other notable races won by Brown included the Ohio Derby, 2 editions of the Louisville Cup, the St. Louis Cup, the Kenner Stakes, the Ashland Oaks, 3 editions of the Kentucky Oaks, and 2 editions of the Clark Stakes. By the close of the 19th century, Brown's health was suffering. He had been afflicted for many years with rheumatism and walked with a cane. He later contracted tuberculosis and died at the age of 56 in 1906. Edward Brown was inducted to the Hall of Fame in 1984.